will now be recorded.
You are back being recorded now.
Okay. This is the June 26th meeting of the Real Estate and Open Space Committee of Harwich. We have just come out of executive session. Charlene, do I need to comment on what? That's it, right? I don't have to, no, okay, we're good. All right, we'll now continue with.
Excuse me, Lien, we probably ought to wait for Art to come in.
He did know he could come back on at 10:15.
9:15.
9:15, sorry. Wishful thinking.
Well, I think we can move on. He can join us. All right, first order of business would be to approval of the executive session minutes from February 21st, 2020. Can you believe it was February? Good grief. So I think we'll do them together. The executive session and regular session meeting minutes from February 21st, 2020. All in favor? Dave?
Yes.
Aye. Marcia?
Was there a motion and a second to approve those?
Oh, okay, we need a motion. Dave, you making a motion?
Sure, I'll make the motion. I wasn't at the meeting, but I'll make the motion. It looks good to me.
So if you weren't at the meeting, remember if you weren't at the meeting, you cannot vote to approve them.
That's right.
Okay, yeah.
But you can make the motion.
I can make the motion that we approve the minutes of the executive session and the regular session from February 21st.
And I'll second that.
That was Kathy.
Yep.
I think we need to say who we are when we're.
Okay.
All right. Okay. All in favor? Carol?
Roll call. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Oh, is that what I'm doing? Roll call?
Yes.
Okay. Marcia?
Yes.
Kathy?
Yes.
James?
Yes.
And myself is a yes. So we have 4 yes and 1 abstain. Okay. Old business. It talked about this land grant that the water superintendent, Dan Pelletier, had read in a newsletter that he received from the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs concerning a drinking water supply protection grant program. I contacted Nathaniel Thomas, who is the gentleman there at the Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, and asked him some information about this land grant. Michael, I'm sure you're very familiar with all this, but it was educational for me. First of all, he was thrilled that anybody read the newsletter. So we scored 1 point there anyways. He was very enthusiastic. He's glad to see that we're interested in it. The maximum award is $300,000, reimbursement of 50%. So if he started asking questions about particular properties and what were they like and what do we have in mind. And I thought this was a good chance to have Dan Pelletier talk to Nathan directly, which he did. And they had a very nice conversation. Some of this may actually apply to properties we've discussed in the past, particularly Little Shaver area. So between Dan and I and Mr. Thomas, we think that it might be a good idea to throw our bid in there for this land grant. Depending on the property that Mr. Pelletier decides might be suitable for this, if it's one of the ones that we've already discussed, we have a lot of the information needed for this application already. And again, the main sticking point, as with all our land things, is an appraisal. So if we want to pursue this, maybe between our committee, the water department, and conservation, maybe if we all gang up, we might be able to get an appraisal done on the property. It can take a while. It doesn't mean the money's going to come in, as soon as they get this. But I think the next step will be get back to Dan Pelletier, see if he's narrowed this down and what properties he thinks he has in mind, other than Little Shaver, maybe, I don't know. So we can go from there. But I think it's a possibility. I mean, it's a way to get, if we can get some of this money towards those properties, why not try for it? We've got nothing to lose except time and effort. Any thoughts from anyone else?
Yeah, Elaine, this is Kathy. What is the application deadline date for an award given this fiscal year or the next one, or however it works?
Yeah, it's January. I think it's January 14th. And it is an annual thing, so it is every year. The newsletter comes out in the fall. So October, I think this past year it came out in October. So would have the information. And but I think between now and October, maybe working with Dan, we can, get the materials assembled. But again, it's the appraisal. Because they request a cover letter of authorizing whoever to act on behalf of the municipality. Of course, the application form. They need a project narrative, parcel maps, which we're good at maps, the appraisal, and a conservation restriction draft. These are things that, other than the appraisal, we should be able to put together before January.
Well, a conservation restriction draft is not that easy. I'm sure, Mike, you can attest to that.
Yes.
Like I said, I'm not familiar with it, and you all are. But maybe if we all pull together, we can get things done.
Elaine, do you have a sense from Dan what parcel he's leaning towards? I think that'll be a key decision, right? And whether said parcel is available.
Well, again, the one that we kept mentioning, of course, was Little Shaver. But Dave, I don't know. Do you know about anything?
Well, I don't know whether Little Shaver would have as much impact. I think Little Shaver would be great, but I'm thinking about the ones down around Will 1 that I think would put on a list E3 of I forget what map it is for tax taking. And right down there on the Chatham Road, there's a whole bunch of property just to the east of Well 1. Okay. I would put that pretty high too, because they're very close to the well, where the Little Shaver Lane is farther away. But either one of those areas, I think, would probably be prime location.
Well, maybe if we can talk to Dan and go over and see which one has the best potential. And then start to gather some information and start getting things together. I don't know. Dave, do you want to be the contact with the water, or do you want me to get back to Dan, or both of us together? I don't know. But you know how the water company functions.
I'm going to contact Dan because we've had, I started conversations with him about 3 years ago. So.
Okay.
But I'll give him a shout out and see if he can prioritize what properties that really matter.
That would be the first step.
Do you have the criteria that they use for this, Elaine, paperwork?
Yeah, I printed out a copy of the application.
Can you forward me anything you've got that,
Okay,
before I talk to Dan, so I could be a little bit prepared to talk intelligent?
sure, no problem.
You know, Lien, if you and Dave, if it's helpful, to also send that information to me, Dave. I'm glad to collaborate with you in furthering a conversation with Dan, if that's helpful.
Good. Thank you, Michael.
All right, Elaine, this is Kathy again. Just a quick question. Who would be the applicant for this protection grant? Is the applicant the water department and we are supporting him, or are we co-applicants? How does that work?
I'm not really sure. That's a good question. I know looking for a cover letter, like I said, of authorization on behalf of the municipality. So I don't know what that exactly would.
Well, the only reason I asked that is because, typically we've been like kind of behind the water department pushing for some stuff, but
Right.
Any action to be taken hasn't been taken because it has to be taken by the water department. So if this is sort of the same thing, that the application has to come from them, we got to make sure they're vested in it, because it's kind of like pushing a boulder uphill.
Yeah, I know. Well, my last conversations with Dan, he was enthusiastic, whether that's one.
He's enthusiastic every single time we've had him in front of us. And that's great. Okay. But nothing's happened.
I know. Well, we'll just keep at it. We'll just, nag. And see what we can get. But I think it's worth exploring. We'll see what we can do. We'll gather the information and see if it's worthwhile to explore this. Okay. So I thank you all for coming in on it. Okay. Anything else on that? Okay. Next on the agenda is the update on the tax lien properties. If you remember back to February, there were 3 properties that we recommended to the tax collector to put in for a foreclosure. I put Amy Bullock just 2 days ago. Originally, when I checked with her not long afterwards, she said that they had been sent to legal. But then when I checked with her the other day, she said they've been told to suspend any foreclosures for the foreseeable future. So things are just kind of sitting there, I guess, until whatever clears up. But they are still there waiting to go to foreclosure. I remember one of them is the one that the water company is interested in up there off Westgate Road in North Harwich. Another water thing. So there's really nothing to report on that. It's just kind of in limbo right now. James, would you like to discuss 0 Cherokee Road?
Sure. You can go ahead with that. I'll just update you on the way I understand the situation now. It's apparently based on the real estate advertising, they're saying that they have 2 separate lots there, but they are currently selling them together. The best I can tell, I haven't called the agent or anything, but it's $365,000 for both of the lots. I'm not sure if anyone else knows anything beyond that, but that is what it is currently listed on the market for that price. So I just wanted to discuss whether there's still interest in purchasing this land, possibly doing a CPC application for the funding, and maybe ask Mike whether HCT still has any interest in being a co-applicant or in the purchase. That's it to begin with anyway.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. ACT is still interested in I have to review the CPC app that we submitted the last round for the proposed amounts to be sourced from town open space CPA funds and then supplemented by ACT fundraising. I think what we got hung up on before with the seller was asking the owner for over several months, for a written opinion by their engineer as to the basis for a development assumption of 2 separate lots. And then that opinion could be verified by a consultant, either retained by ACT or the town, maybe even the town building commissioner. Sorry. Okay. Somehow verify the seller's engineer's development assumptions, and then that would form the basis of a revised appraisal, because the town's first appraisal, the appraiser valued the land as unbuildable. And the CPC wanted to see a revised appraisal before it went any further in its decision-making process on whether to support or not support the application. So I think we're in the same place we were relative to not having that information from the seller. And then if and when we were to obtain that, we have to start the appraisal process again for a revised appraisal. Maybe the town could go back to that same appraiser, so it's not as much time or work to bring it forward under a revision under a different development assumption. But that's my understanding at the moment. At the time, ACT was retaining Richard Waystack as an agent on behalf of ACT to engage the seller's agent. We could revisit that with Richard unless the Real Estate Open Space Committee wanted to go a different route or try and speak directly to the seller or seller's agent. It must be seller's agent because it's actively listed. So those are some of my thoughts at the moment.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, Richard Waystack was a good ally in that. And, we had a real time crunch last year, and the time ran out, basically. I guess in a way it didn't, because town meeting hasn't even happened, but we thought it did. So this would be obviously for the next year. So maybe there's time to get these issues worked out. Well, I don't know whether it's appropriate or, I would be interested in talking to the sellers or another member of the Real Estate and Open Space Committee. I know they've had engineering done by Clark Engineering, I believe, and they have, put together their listing as 2 separate lots. And obviously, we would ultimately need an appraisal to come in at the right number. It's not really a dissimilar situation to the log property we were just talking about. There's an appraiser has to be able to look at that and judge its value based on assumptions, essentially, not guarantees. Appraisals are not a guarantee of value; they're an assumption of value. I don't think that should be that hard to do. I think there was a miscommunication in the initial appraisal. But anyway, I'm interested in pushing forward in whatever way we can. It's a really critical piece in that Hawk's Nest forest area. It's a real keystone piece, in my opinion. And the price is actually quite low. Nearly 7 acres for an asking price of $365 is, in today's market, pretty low, all upland. So Be curious to know if the other members have thoughts on this.
I have some thoughts, if I may. I've spoken with Agent Darcy Sequin, and this was pre-COVID, so it's been several months. She basically is selling it as developable land of 2 lots that are divided. One is on the water side to the north, which is 1 acre, and then 5.6 acres to the south side of Nathan Walker. At the time, they were going to have it staked. They hadn't had it staked at the times when I talked with her with regards to the actual divisions. I did approach her about what is the building envelope as far as, where have they done any of the contours, so that you can see what is developable and what is not. I believe the price, the asking price, kind of reflects the fact that there's probably a lot of it that is not developable, but that's just my own opinion. So I would be willing to revisit with Darcy to see if she has had any progress with the staking and with any type of plan that shows more of a building envelope or, developable land, if anybody would like that.
Yeah, Marcy, that would be good. My question is, would they consider selling the lots separately?
That's a good question. I can ask them that. I think that perhaps the fact that they don't have the information, or they're obtaining the information as to if they're separately buildable, I think that's where the question lies. Usually when you're selling lots together, sometimes separately they're not as lucrative. So I'm assuming that they're selling them together because they're more beneficial to develop on together as opposed to apart. But I can find out that information from them to find out if they have ever looked into selling them separately, or if there is another listing. Sometimes they'll list the land separately with 2 different listing numbers, and then, together as one bundle with a different listing number. So I can look into that.
Can I add some information? So we've been through that question with the seller back in 2019 when we asked if there was an interest in selling them separately, and they said no. Some time has passed. They're marketing it as 2 lots for 1 price. So that's just more information. We had also asked them at the time if they were interested in a conservation restriction, sale of a conservation restriction. They said no. Their listing, I think, reflects their intent of selling it, the aggregate, and then, the assumption of two building lots. Maybe it's worth asking the question again. I think there's a larger question here, and that is, at the time, the communication channel was through HCT's agent, Richard Waystack. So I think at this point in time, we should decide whether we continue that relationship through HCT, or if the Real Estate and Open Space Committee wants to take the lead on this communication with the seller, because I have to, if that is the case, then I need to communicate to Richard clearly that is the Real Estate and Open Space Committee's interest. And then I think if that is the case, then HCT would probably take more of a supportive role as opposed to a lead role, since we're not, engaged in the leading the communication. I'm open to whichever, but I just want to be fair to Richard, since he's already been engaged in this on our behalf, and thereby extension on the town's behalf. He did represent us well in the meetings with the CPC and in conversations with the seller. there may be benefit to continuing with him because of that relationship that was already established. Another point I want to mention is that, yes, the seller is claiming developability of 2 lots. I believe at the time the CPC was not only looking for, substantiation of that with some kind of, written statement from their engineer, but also, if I remember correctly, there might have been discussion of review by the planning board. I don't think that was hard and fast item stated by the CPC, but I do remember something along those lines. And if that's the case, we need to include even more time between now and October 1st if the intent is to send in another application to CPC. So those are just some things to consider. This project is a little more complicated than it looks on its face, I think. And we've already experienced that on the first go around. So,
right, Charlene, Charlene, there were items that were required to present to the CPC that weren't available at the time when we were making this application. Can you remember offhand?
I can jump in, being on the CPC.
Oh, okay, James, go ahead.
It was an appraisal, and that's an appraisal that would show a value, that the town was going to pay, because we can't pay more than an appraisal. And because that initial appraisal came in so low at 80,000, that was a major roadblock. Right. So we need. So I still do not know how that appraisal came in so low. It doesn't make sense to me, but that appraisal would need to be adjusted for us to move forward.
Okay, as I've said in the past, I believe it's a worthwhile endeavor. I see the value of this property. Having said that, I don't want to go through what we went through last year. The family putting it on the market, taking it off the market, the appraisal problem, not getting things. I don't want to go through that again. I would, if we're going to move forward with it at all, I'd kind of like to see things firmed up, tied up, and good to go before we start meeting with CPC and having things fall apart as we go along. I don't know. Others' thoughts. Charlene.
The only way to determine that this lot is buildable is for the property owner or prospective owner or somebody to provide the necessary information and documentation and file for a building permit. So I think the reason the appraisal came in low is because based on the information available, town council and the appraiser determined that this was not a buildable lot. Until information is provided otherwise, that probably will continue to stand. As far as Nathan Walker Road itself, I don't know if the planning board has ever provided a determination as to whether or not it provides for safe and adequate access. So that may be something else that would need to happen. But, until further information is done on the part of the seller, I'm not sure what more the town can do.
Thank you. Mike, I think, as you said, being as Mr. Waystack has already established with these folks, do you think you would be able to go back to them with the things like Charlene just mentioned? And in his opinion, if it looks like it's not going to happen with them, well, I mean, what else can we do?
I think I agree with you. I think that would make the most sense at this point, given the history of communication between Richard and not only the seller's agent, but actually had conversation with the sellers too at one point.
Right.
I think that also would, so the substantiation of the development assumption is a requirement. We know that, right? That's going to provide the foundation for a revised appraisal. I think we also have to include, or Richard should include, a time frame for this. That's one of the things we got hung up on. There was no timely response by the seller in order to meet the CPC's needs. We could have Richard communicate to the seller's agent that we need this information by X date, perhaps before your July 17th meeting.
Right.
If they, having their engineer write an opinion is one step. I think another piece of this, maybe that's more conversation between Richard and Charlene as to whether there needs to be an actual permit applied for, and would that be a contingency of any offer? I would think any other private buyer would build in that contingency in an offer. In other words, submit an offer to the seller. Within that purchase offer, as it's subject to acquiring a building permit by X date. Perhaps that's, again, a conversation between Richard and Charlene to see if that would be really a bottom line item to acquire in order to truly substantiate value. So those are some thoughts. So I'm glad to relay this to Richard, or you can relay it to Richard, whichever you prefer.
I think it's best if you do it. Marcia, I appreciate your knowledge and your real estate expertise. And
likewise, yeah.
Always value your input on these things. But with this, we should continue with Richard.
Oh, no, I agree with that. I agree, no problem. One thing I would like for Richard to maybe find out, if he hasn't found out already, but there needs to be not just a site plan of the two lots, but there needs to be a site plan that has the building contours of what is a developable building envelope. Because for them to list it as developable lots, they have to have some sort of documentation that states that. So that would be, I'm sure Richard, with his expertise, I'm sure that he has found that out or not. Maybe that is why the appraisal came up so low, was because they don't have that information as to what is the building envelope, and the appraiser can only go by what he sees. So I'm perfectly fine with Richard continuing that relationship, but I just think, like Mike said, we need to have some contingencies written in with specific dates. Maybe looking at the meeting dates of when the planning board or the zoning board meets could influence those timelines. But I think also the main thing is to find out what documentation they have on the seller's side to substantiate the claim that they're two developable lots. So that's just my thing. But yeah, I'm perfectly fine with Richard taking it over.
Right. And let's remember, October 1st is 3 months and 4 days away.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have a lot of time if people are just going to, not act quickly.
Mm-hmm.
One other point, is it possible for somebody to talk to the appraiser?
Charlene is saying no.
Why is that?
Well, the appraisal was based on the information that the appraiser had at hand at the time. So,
I understand that, but we could discuss what information they would need. I mean, to me, it's very odd to value 7 acres of upland for $80,000 in Harwich, and I would.
Because it was appraised as being unbuildable, and Marcia was absolutely right in what she said. She was right on point. It's the burden of proof on the property owner, on the seller, to show that the lot is actually buildable. And until then,
I understand that, but an appraiser is just giving an opinion of the value of the property, their assumption of the value. It's not a guarantee I only say this because I've had appraisals done on multiple properties on Cape Cod and off of raw land, and they generally come in what you would expect to pay for the land approximately. This isn't like 7 acres of wetland. So I'm just very curious to know what that appraiser actually was looking at and what was missing.
Well, you know what, James? I think, as Marcia said, if they had the site plan with the buildable area outlined on it, and that was
Contours, yeah.
the appraiser, it might help matters. Am I correct?
Well, I don't know what they had or what they didn't have, but it might just be, they might just say, oh, well, we just need a plan that it's all upland. There's not much to look at. There may or may not be a setback from the pond, but I mean, the land goes, 900 feet from the pond. I mean, there's a huge amount of upland. There is no wetland on the property.
You keep saying upland. You can't say upland because you don't, without knowing the contours and the buffer zones, you know, the 50 foot, the 100 foot from whatever wetland. You can't say upland unless you actually have that building envelope. And that's what I think they don't have.
Well, I understand that, but the property is just so large, and I'm very familiar with it. I think something went wrong with that appraisal, and it would be really nice to communicate with the person who did it.
All right, let's leave it at this. Michael, if you can contact Mr. Waystack, inform him what our thoughts are and what our plans. Meanwhile, Charlene, maybe we can coordinate on when the planning board meeting and zoning or whoever else we need to.
Well, if I might, something needs to go to the planning board. So until that's that, I mean,
But if we know the dates, then we can appraise those.
schedule's available on the town website.
And say, you know, that we need it before these dates. That's
It's on their website, yeah.
It's on the website.
okay. All righty.
And if it's a public hearing or just a public meeting also dictates. Right now, if it requires a public hearing, we're into August for hearings.
Yeah, see? And there looms October 1. Okay, Michael, whatever you need, I can, whatever, with Mr. Waystack.
I'll relay all of this to Richard.
Yeah, let's see what we can go on this.
And I'm happy to have any conversation as a town planner with anybody, so.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Charlene. Thank you. All right. Let's see what we can do with this to, you know, I hate to just cut it, but let's see if it's possible to make an effort to do this. Okay. Next on our agenda, new business. Discussion and possible vote to refer property located on Pleasant Lake Road. Dave, this was your suggestion. Would you like to talk to us about this property?
Okay, I'm trying to get to I want to share my screen, and I'll show you the parcel that I'm thinking about. It's going to be over here. And this kind of relates to something Mike had discussed. And this is a parcel over there at the intersection of, I apologize. This is trying to control the screen here with all the other stuff that's going on. This is over at the intersection of the rail trail and Pleasant Lake. Mike had described the selectmen as owning a bunch of property up here above the bog area. This piece of property right here, P1, that comes from the intersection of Pleasant Lake Avenue and the rail trail along Pleasant, basically it's 124, down to the town's property. It's a half an acre. It is under tax lien. It's probably got more back taxes on it than it is worth. And this would be right at the edge of where Long Pond Road comes out. It faces it. It's just a narrow stretch of that. But it would mean that the town would have ownership of all of this property up in here. And it just kind of completes the whole triangle that goes all the way down to Headwaters Drive, should that ever come to fruition. So I spotted it, thought it made sense to throw that on as another potential tax lien to go for. And I just wonder if people were interested in it as well.
Well, I do think it completes the package for that area. Any thoughts, anyone?
What's the appraised value, David?
There hasn't been an appraised value. All we can do is justify based upon.
What's the assessed
Is there an
value?
assessed value?
Yeah.
I want to say $600.
I think it was 666 or something like six. Yeah, I did look it up.
It's got to be unbuildable because the thing is so narrow. So.
Yeah, it's 0.470 acres. And the amount of tax owed is $633.69. I didn't see an assessed.
Maybe I was thinking the back taxes on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they haven't paid taxes on it in, I don't know, 5 or 6 years.
2000, I think 2009 or something.
It's assessed at $600.
600, yeah.
600 in taxes,
Yeah.
back taxes.
It's 633, so they owe more than it's worth.
Yep.
I would entertain a motion to refer this to the town tax collector to put for foreclosure.
I would like to make that motion. I got to remember exactly what this is. Map 92, parcel P1, which is currently in tax lien status, be taken by the town for conservation purposes, or, well, actually, I think as the tax taken, we can't define what the actual use would be, but I would recommend it be taken by the town. There'd be a foreclosure on it.
We hear a second?
I'll second that, it's Kathy.
All right, roll call vote. Dave?
Yes.
Carol? Carol?
She's muted.
Carol?
Yes.
Yes. Marcia?
Yes.
Kathy?
Yes.
James?
Yes.
And myself, yes. So it would be a unanimous vote, and I will contact the tax collector and refer this property over to her. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, we've already discussed the next meeting date, but is there anything else anyone would like to bring up? No. Okay. As I said, our next meeting would be July 17th. Charlene, hopefully we're going to be doing this again the same way with this go-to meeting. Now that we've all had a little bit of experience with it. I need a
And I'm
lot.
always happy to help.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I have a question. I have a
I
question
have a question too. Yeah, go ahead, Carol.
just about the next meeting is July 17th. Now, are we going to meet at 8:30 or will we need more time for the, will we need more time for the site visit? So should we meet at 9?
Well, the site visit will meet at 8 o'clock. Michael, how much time do you think we'll need?
If you want to walk the full property, probably need somewhere in the order of a half hour, 45 minutes at least. You don't have to walk the full property. I mean, I think we can get a sense of the property in less time. So if you need to, is the idea that we meet in person at 8, socially distant, and then afterwards you have a remote meeting? Is that what the idea is? Okay.
Yeah, so we'll all need time to get back to our home computers. It's not like we're coming back to town hall.
Mhm. I think to give yourself plenty of time, you'd probably want to have your remote meeting start at 9. Is my guess.
Charlene?
I was just going to suggest that you post them as two separate things. Post your on-site and then post your regular meeting to start whenever you guys decide you want to start it at 9, 9:15 or what have you as remote participation.
Okay, well, if we meet at 8, 9.
You don't need to figure it out now, but.
Folks have to travel, so I'll need input on how long it's going to take you to get home and get things set up. So, yes, Dave.
I would suggest just, we have the 8 o'clock for the site visit and just schedule it for 9:15. That gives you 45 minutes is probably, where it'll end up. But you could run it as much as an hour and then we'd have 15 minutes to get home. I don't know where everybody lives and how far they have to go, but I think that would be a sufficient time for people to
I
travel.
think we can get from one end of town to the other in 15 minutes.
I can, if there's no construction.
Closures and detours and turkeys walking across the road where I got stuck yesterday.
And I can get on before you guys because I won't do the on-site and make sure that it's up and running. So.
Okay, thank you very much. All righty. Okay, if there's nothing else.
So what was the final decision, 9:15?
9:15.
Yes, 9:15.
Got it.
Okay. We need a motion to adjourn.
I motion to adjourn.
Second.
Seconded.
Okay, roll call. Dave,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Marcia,
Yes.
Kathy,
Yeah.
James.
He's
James
gone.
left the meeting.
Oh, okay. And myself is a yes. Thank you all for doing this. I appreciate
Thanks,
it.
everybody.
It's kind of,
Have a
crazy.
great
for us,
weekend.
but
Thank you.
Good to see you all again.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm closing your meeting.